Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Anti-Racism for Allies. What do you do when you don't know where to start? And so today we are going to be taking a bunch of questions right where people are. No judgment, safe space. So my name is Carrie Sawyer and you are here with the Inclusion First Project. And we have an incredible guest today. Her name is Monique Mendoza and she is with UCSD Health and she also is a consultant. So Monique, I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. You're on mute, babe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to be here. Again, my name is Monique Mendoza. I'm a psychologist, a consultant. I work in program management and have done that work in both healthcare and higher education environments. I'm so excited to be a part of the Inclusion First Project, and hearing all of your questions just excites me to understand how we can reveal more answers and get to more action as we move forward with this project. So thank you all for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monique. And so we are going to go through just a couple of slides and then we will jump right into the content. Our goal today, of course, is to answer as many questions as possible. So to that end, we have questions that have been submitted ahead of time and we have several that we are going to be jumping to. But then if you have a question that comes up for you or you brought one in your mind already, feel free to throw that either into the chat or into the Q&A and we will answer that as we go as well. And if you like to stay anonymous, then you can actually, when you submit your question via the Q&A, there's a little drop down by your name where you can switch it to anonymous. That way we won't know who it is and you can keep your anonymity. And then we're not going to be calling out any names while we're on here today, just to let people, again, be in this safe space, no judgment, and we'll answer all the questions that we can get to in the next 60 minutes. So before we start, we just like to give a little bit of an idea of what to expect. So tonight's flow, we're going to spend just a little bit of time setting our collective tone. We're going to offer some definitions. It's always great to be on the same page when we talk about anti-racism and allies. Like, what do those things mean? We'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll jump right into the questions for the remainder of the time that we have together tonight. So I started to allude to this already. We really want to create a positive space. And so this is a safe space. All questions are welcome that are asked in the spirit of learning and wanting to know more and do more. There's no shame, no blame. This is a judgment-free zone. And so a couple of things that we're also doing while we're here today is we are modeling how to have these conversations around race. And so you can take some of these tips, some of these frameworks back into your own life, whether that be work or home or anywhere in between. And the first point that we like to bring up in that area is that we are speaking for ourselves only. I am not speaking for all Black people or Black women or San Diegans. Monique is not speaking for all Mexican Americans or mothers or San Diegans. We're just speaking as our own selves based on our own experiences, right? And so as you're having these conversations as well in your own lives, take the person as they are. Drop all stereotypes, drop all assumptions, ask questions, get curious, and really be with that person who is in front of you. We also wanted to say, caveat this, that we don't know everything. And that goes for everyone, right? I don't know every single thing about being Black. I don't know everything about Black history. I don't know everything about the Black experience. I only know about mine. And that's actually part of this. This is a journey that we're on together today and throughout the rest of our lives, right? So our job is to keep learning, keep growing, keep running into those barriers when we don't understand, keep getting back up and keep learning more. And so everyone is at a different point in this journey, and that is a-okay. Like I said before, there's really no shame or blame. We all know different things, and we're coming to this table together to learn and grow together. But what that looks like is going to be completely different for every person. Your role in driving change is going to be unique to you because we're all positioned uniquely in a family circle, in a work circle, in a community circle, and how you are able to influence people and what you're able to show and do and say is going to be completely based on who you are, what you know, and the skills that you have. So we just encourage you to find that spot, find that space, find that sweet spot where you're just able to lead by example, but that's going to look different for you. So Monique, anything to add to this list as people are thinking about how to have conversations around race and creating that like safe space for dialogue?
One of the biggest pieces about it is being open to where you're going to fit in that conversation and in that dialogue. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we move forward and even within some of our questions, but it might look different. It might be speaking up, it might be taking a step back and listening. And so it's an awesome opportunity to give yourself a reminder that where you are in that process is going to look different from every question that we're going to pose today and every different environment that people are coming from.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well said. Okay, so again, we encourage you to send questions in the Q&A, so feel free to do that at any point. We're going to start by talking about some definitions, and today we're going to do a little different than we have in the past. So if you've been with us before, you're tuning in for new questions, you'll get to see something different in this intro as well. And so we're starting off with anti-racist, and this is by Dr. Kendi, and this is from his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And this is a really academic definition, so we're going to talk a little bit about what this means in real terms as well. So an anti-racist is someone who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing anti-racist ideas. This includes the expression or ideas that racial groups are equal and do not need developing, and supporting policies that reduce racial inequity. Okay, Monique, how would you translate that into regular people terms?
I really think about it as a place of being action oriented. So anti-racist to me is looking at it from the place of action. What are the ways that we are going to continue this work, and what are some of the action words that we can place on some of the ways that we're going to be challenging these racially inequitable policies, practices that we see or that we're confronted with every day.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was great. That was great. And I just echo Monique on this action-oriented idea. And so the biggest part of being anti-racist and supporting anti-racism is really around this place where it says expressing the ideas that racial groups are equal and that no one needs developing. And so this idea that one is better than the other, or that people have unique flaws or somehow lower, that's not in the anti-racism definition. I mean, that's actually on the racist side, right? And so we are all the same. And this comes from just the historical structuring of how Black people were. I can't remember the percentage of a person. It was 3/5, or it was a small amount of a person. We weren't classified as a whole human being. And so that justified the treatment of slaves. And so now in this anti-racism world and paradigm, everyone is equal, no matter what, right? And this is just that's really the basis of it. So an anti-racism specifically is the work of actively opposing racism by advocating for changes in political, economic, and social life. And I love this because it talks about basically all areas of life, right? So number one, actively opposing. In the area of anti-racism, there is no neutral, there's no Switzerland. Either you are supporting anti-racism or you aren't, which means that you're supporting racism. Inactivity allows racist structures and racist ideas to continue. And in that, you are not supporting anti-racism. And so that's kind of where that line is. And then this is really thorough, right? So in politics, in the government, in economics, and how our money is moving and how we have access or not. And then in our social life, which of course is everything. And so looking at all of these structures and looking all around everywhere for opportunities to hold up anti-racism and to break down the racist structures that are around us.
Yeah, Carrie, I think some pieces with that is that it also includes the ideas around the personal changes that we'll need to make or even understand within ourselves, and some of the structures that maybe historically we've had, or just our family history or those types of things. So it's also working to actively oppose those and how they look at all of the changes across all of those structures.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that, Mo, what you said, it was really wrapped up really nicely in this quote by Ijoma Oluo. So she wrote a book called Let's Talk About Race. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And so we know that there's racism built in into a lot of the systems and structures around us, but because we live in a racist society, racism is also built into us. And so it's our job to find out where those biases are, where those prejudices are, and pull them out and replace them with more inclusive thinking and with more ways to connect as people versus, across these racial judgments that are very ingrained in our society. So I wanted to share a video, and some of you may have seen this before, but as we're talking about anti-racism, one of the questions that comes up is like, okay, so this is anti-racism. What is racism? And so there is this really great YouTube video, you might have seen it, circulating that talks about systemic racism. And so we're going to show it. It's just like 4 minutes long, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. And if you have questions or have comments on it, feel free to dump those in the chat, and we'll bring those up as well. All right, so hang on, I'm going to share my screen. And then I'm going to click the computer sound. Okay, good. All right.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
Okay, awesome. So I really like, I like all cartoons, especially in this space, just because it's like a simple way to talk about a heavy. We're not going to watch or hear Chris Rock right now. Sorry, that's like the autoplay. Okay, Chris, you are not invited to this at this time. Maybe another time we can interview him. But I love watching those cartoons because it just lays it out in a really simple way. And the first time that I saw that video, I actually learned a lot about, I don't have children, and so how property taxes impact education. That wasn't something that I was actually aware of. And so, we're always learning new things. But it just starts to show I feel like that cartoon just scratches the surface of like systemic racism. It's just giving you examples of different areas, because there's probably like 15 more sectors. Every sector basically has racism built into it. And there are so many other negative impacts that come from it. But I think that's really just a nice overview of like what racism looks like in play in the systems that govern our whole world and definitely our country and our lives. Mo, what are your thoughts around that video and some of the messages that you see?
Oftentimes when people are seeing that one for the first time, or just being introduced to the idea of systemic racism, it can really feel like, wow, what is going to be my role as an individual in tackling this ideas and this history of systemic racism within our country? It feels very daunting, and it can feel very overwhelming. But I think what we'll talk about today and some of the questions and what I like about the end of the video is where are the places that we can continue to educate ourselves around what systemic racism looks like, and what kind of questions should we be asking about our policies, our practices, in particular, just what the ways that hiring works within our organizations or our areas, and hearing about those, whether or not that's an experience somebody's had, and hearing about it, listening to it, paying attention to some of the experiences that anybody has had as they process through any of those systems. So it's just a great process to be able to talk about how an individual can really seek to understand more about systemic racism and their role as like a cog in the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And understanding where we sit is kind of like that first step to understanding where we can make a difference. And to Monique's point, like it is overwhelming because it is everywhere, right? But that's why it's important for you to do kind of that self-work to understand where you are, and then pick something that is important to you, right? Pick something that's meaningful. Maybe it's meaningful because you have children and you want to see equity brought to the school system. Maybe it's important to you because that's the field that you're working in. You're already an expert. You already know the lay of the land in this space. And so you're uniquely positioned again to make that difference, right? And it also could be just in your own social circles as well, in your family, the conversations that you're having or not having as well. So it's a process, but that's why we're here. We're here to learn and to start to think about where do I fit in? Because you have a lot of choices. You have a lot of options on how to step into this for sure. Okay, so we are going to jump into some of the questions that were submitted for this week's workshop. I'm going to read the first one to you, Mo, and then I'll let you go on it, and I'll jump in and we can just kind of go back and forth. Okay, so the first one. I completely support the anti-racism movement, but recently I've been feeling like it's losing momentum and people aren't caring as much anymore. What can I do? And how often should I be doing it to keep the momentum going?
I love this question around, the idea of where is this going? And we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is the momentum was largely in social media, in looking and seeing how we push this movement forward. There was so much attention. There was more media attention to protests and actions you can take and ways that you can support. And in the context of social media and events that happen and things that are grabbing our attention, it's going to shift. And so, maybe it's shifting now to a different thing that's going to be a major focus for our country. But that doesn't mean that the work and the effort in the Black Lives Movement is over or has dissipated in any way. if it's been on your radar, or if it was brought to your radar because of those avenues of like a wide social media movement or hearing about the protests, I think it's safe to say that it's something that was brought to you instead of something that you were seeking out. Now, what the challenge is with that is that this is an opportunity to continue to seek out. You're here, you've gotten to the place of being completely supportive of the anti-racism movement. So that is step one. Great, you're on board. Step two is, how do you continue your own momentum with that? And that can be in bigger or smaller ways. Maybe it's finding those avenues where you were hearing continuously about that information and following them because they're still putting out information. Maybe it's maybe as simple as, you know what, I'm going to set like a calendar reminder every week to dive in and see where it's at, what's going on. And then it's also thinking about, what do you want to see? Where are the places where you want to see that movement and that change happen, that maybe you're curious about whether or not that momentum has stopped in that area, or what you would like to see moving forward, and how can you continue to push that within your full support of the movement. So Carrie, I'm curious about your thoughts about this too.
Yeah, I love just thinking about, what do you want to see? Because at the end of the day, this is about the world that we want to create. And so thinking more deeply about that, and then where do you want to see that? And I think we all have a really big opportunity, both in our social circles and then in the places where we work. And I think that, as a D&I professional, and Mo, I know that this is happening at your work as well. A lot of companies are like, we want diversity and inclusion, like people and training and all of these things, right? So even though that might not be on social media, that work is absolutely happening. And so being able to maybe raise your hand and be a part of that, even if that makes you feel uncomfortable because you're not an expert, this is a great opportunity to start to learn, to start to lend your voice, and to start to lend your perspective. Because what we really need right now are bridges, I feel like, and liaisons between the work that is happening and the people who are entering this conversation for the first time, new allies, being that example, like, hey, maybe I don't know how to do this exactly, but I'm willing to learn. And so understanding what that looks like, that might be amplifying voices, that might be asking your leadership at work, what are we doing? What is the plan for diversity and inclusion for us? How are we making sure that this is an intentional, like strategic initiative versus kind of a check the box, right? So I think that there's lots of things that we can do, just understanding what's happening at our work and potentially being another set of eyes and ears and hands to help move that forward. And then also thinking about what that looks like in our home life. Do you have kids? Are you, in conversations where you could have the opportunity to stand up and try to disrupt some stereotypes or some racist ideas, right? And so this idea of, one of the examples I like to give is like, it's no longer acceptable. Like if you hear someone say, oh, that's so gay. Like if you say that around people, they're like, what do you mean by that? Like, it's not gay, actually. Like, that's not a thing, right? And so when you're having these conversations, and it's not just about like black and white, right? Like anti-racism is between like all races, and anti-racism, like sexism, homophobic, xenophobia, like all of these different things, it's all the same skill set. And so you have an opportunity to become a disruptor and an interrupter in your social circles and in your family circles as well. And so I know, of course, that can be easier said than done. And sometimes you'll see something or hear something that's like off, and you'll be like, oh, like you'll get like kind of caught up because you weren't expecting it. And you're like, oh gosh, this is it. This is the moment for me to be the interrupter. What do I do? And sometimes we freeze in that moment, right? And it passes and we're like, I missed it. Like I missed it. And then we get down on ourselves. But the thing is, the first step is noticing those moments happening, because if you notice and you don't say anything, I guarantee the next time you're going to be that much more apt to try to say something and try to interrupt as well. So just looking for those opportunities and really starting to, we talk a lot about educating yourself, starting to, like Mo said, like follow those different sources where you were seeing that information before, looking at those podcasts, watching those movies, reading those books to start to, again, understand like, where is your privilege and where are parts of American history that maybe I don't understand that lead to these racist systems, so that I can have these and be armed with this information as I'm navigating both my social and professional spaces. So I think that there's a lot that we can do. And also just thinking about the fact that, the media has a different agenda than what we think it is, right? And so just because stuff isn't happening on social media as much as it was, doesn't mean that a lot of stuff stuff isn't happening, because they've got their whole other thing going on. And, you know, we're about to enter like hardcore election season, and we're going to start to see the media's agenda many, many times over. So just always keep that in mind as well. I'm not going to go any deeper into that. I was like, whoa.
One of the pieces around the anti-racism movement and the way that it started was for us to get to a place of discomfort with what we were seeing and what we were understanding about our history and what's happening in our country today. And I think an easy question to pose to yourself is, am I okay with the way that it is right now? And if it's a yes, you know, you're thinking like, does that mean that I'm supporting the anti-racism movement? And if it's a no, then your next thing is, okay, what are the ways that I am going to challenge that? In what spheres? Is it at work? Is it at home? Is it with continuing my education, my reading, my viewing? And just having that check for yourself can be a really good place to see that the movement is still within you if there's a place of discomfort with the way that you see it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's good. That's good stuff. Okay, do you want to read me the next question? I'll go first on this one.
Okay. So Carrie, the next question is, my sister-in-law, who is white, is married to an African-American man, and he and his family are always late to family functions. We joke with each other about this. Is that in poor taste? Where is the line?
So I think that this is a really interesting question, because I think that there's lots of, I mean, you could kind of sub out like so many different like family scenarios, be like, is this racist or is this not racist? And this actually, I mean, it totally depends, because, you know, and this might be buried in the question. So like, are you assuming that he's late because he's Black? And you're like playing into the stereo that Black people are lazy, they're slow, they don't arrive on time. Or are you just making fun of him because he's him and he happens to be late, right? And so and then what's the mindset of the other people that you're laughing with about this? Because of course we know intellectually that like lateness has nothing to do with race, right? And that there are tons of Black people who are on time and tons of Black people that aren't on time. You know, tons of Mexicans that are on time and tons of Mexicans that are on time. I have a friend, she's Spanish, and I told her that I was telling this story, my friend Marta, and it's like ridiculous how late she is. Like if she's gonna if it starts at noon, she'll be there around 1:30, 1:45. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to the store and it's 1:15. I'm like, it started at noon. Is it because she's Spanish? No, her family's totally on time, but it's because it's her, right? And so it's understanding like what are we attributing this behavior to, and does that have to do with the race of the person? Are we perpetuating a stereotype? And then is this an opportunity for us, going back to the previous question, for us to like stand up and say, hey, you know, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with this because he's not late because he's Black. Like he's late because he just has bad time management. Like let's just leave it there, right? And so that might be an uncomfortable thing, but this is like a small opportunity to start to like shift the conversations and shift what's okay to say and like what's not okay to say. Mo, what do you think?
I completely agree. I think, you know, this also comes into place of merging family systems. So there may be a family system that super values promptness and being on time and starting, you know, when the party says to start at 2:00, you know, that's when it's starting. Unfortunately, that's not the family that I came from. So I definitely understand, you know, that difference, and that may be a value and ideal that might be different from these merging family systems. So that's something to take into consideration if that is, you know, the root of where they might be joking with that, because along that comes with the family is also those jibes that you take to each other about those things. I'm having very similar experiences with, you know, family members that I'll tell them it's 3 hours earlier than what we want them to be there for. We can all be there at the same time. But again, when you start to connect it to race or to a particular marginalized group or groups, you know, that's when we start to see what is the intent and the impact of the jokes that we're making, the statements that we're making. And so that's a place to be more critical about it. But again, it's also looking at where you started with it, Carrie. It really depends, and it's just that big understanding around what's the impact that you're having there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just a really interesting question, because I think that it applies to so many different scenarios. And one thing also to think about is, you know, sometimes we might make jokes that aren't that just fall flat, or that are actually hurting someone, and they're not able to let us know that, just based on, you know, the family structure or what's going on. They don't want to be the Debbie Downer. But actually being, especially in this time when we're learning how to talk about race, when you find yourself in a situation like that, just letting people know, hey, you know what, it's important to me that I'm holding up like anti-racist ideas, that I'm not being prejudiced, I'm checking my own stereotypes. And so if you ever hear me say something that is like tweaking on that, that is going against that, just let me know. Like creating that safe space for people, because I mean, if this, you know, he's coming to their family, right? So the power dynamic is already off. Like even if these jokes did bother him, is it a safe space for him to like bring it up? Like probably not. And so as we're relearning how to talk about race, how can we create that proactively for each other? When you have a blended family, even if, I mean, when you have, even with your friends, you know, just letting people know, I'm open to learning in this space. I'm going to make mistakes, and I would love for you to let me know, because if you don't, I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to miss that opportunity. So just thinking about, you know, how do we create the space for those conversations to even emerge, so that we can learn, and that we can, again, stop saying the things that we probably shouldn't be saying anymore, because this is a new day.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. Let me just check to see if we have any questions. Okay, no questions yet. Feel free to pop them in, people. All right, so this one is around microaggressions. So microaggressions are alive and well in my world. I often hear white people describe a person of color as very well spoken, or described in a way where they are judging the person of color's level of blackness. Like, don't worry, they dress very professionally, and so on. How can I address these comments in a way that is productive in the moment? I'm white, by the way. That's what this person is kind of self-identified. So Monique, I want to take a step back on this. How do you explain microaggressions to someone?
Yeah, I think it's those places where, again, it's subtle. So it's these subtle forms of kind of undercutting of a person's background, a person's culture, race, for a lot of different areas. And that undercutting often has this place in putting that inequity in whatever the interaction or relationship is. So, like what the question is asking about, very well spoken, it also comes from a place of like that is not an attribute that that person from that particular culture, race, or background would not typically assume, or would not typically hold or have. And so therefore it comes as a surprise, and it sometimes to the blind eye can look like a compliment, or like a backhanded compliment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's looking at those places where it's this assumption and this idea that the comments that are being made are not supposed to be my experience of that person within that culture or race, or so many other areas that it's definitely can go across. I say race, but it's so limiting, because it can happen to people of different genders, of cultures, of backgrounds, religions, everything.
Like all of these different things. Oh, you're so pretty for a big girl, or you're so pretty for a black girl, or
well, you don't have an accent. Yes.
Yeah.
Any number of.
There's so many, even like, saying to an Asian person, oh, you're good at math. Like they're like, what? That has nothing to do with, like, just because I'm Asian doesn't mean that I'm good at math. So it's these stereotypes exactly that we perpetuate in these like backhanded comments, backhanded compliments, which actually aren't. I feel like lots of people, regardless of whether you're a person of color or not, if you think about a time where someone is like giving you that backhanded compliment, those are basically microaggressions, and they build up, right? Like a person of color will, and I won't even just say of color, but we're talking about race here. So that's why I'm bringing that up, because you'll get a lot of microaggressions as different as in like the step down group, whether that is gender or your race or like socioeconomic status, education, all of these different things. You'll get like thousands of them in your lifetime. And it's like this death by 1,000 cuts, right? And so it's very jarring when it happens to you and you're not really sure, like what do I do? And so this question is like, how can I address these comments in a way that is productive in the moment? So this person is wanting to either call out this behavior or call in that person for what they said. And I think with a microaggression, especially, one thing that you can do is like ask someone to like explain like what they mean, right? Because even in the process of repeating yourself, we start to like hear what we said and then can sometimes like backtrack, right? Like, oh, I could see why that sounded weird. And actually, this is what I meant. Monique talked about the your intent versus your impact. So your intent might have very well been to tell the person that they're a really great speaker. But like, why? Like, why is that a thing? Your impact, however, was a microaggression. And now you're creating this kind of chasm. You're hurting that person, even if it's just a small cut. Over time, these add up. And that person has probably experienced many, many, many more of them. So it's not really a small thing. Mo, what do you think? How do you recommend people address this happening?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think being able to ask the question, what did you mean by that, is a great opener to allowing for some more critical thinking from the person that's delivering that microaggression. Because that's really what we're looking for, and wanting to get an understanding. The what are you thinking is also a great question in the way of just opening up that dialogue, and saying, tell me a little bit about what you mean by that, or help me understand what that means, when you say it to that person in particular, because you're also coming from the place of being open to hearing about where they might have come from with that. Many times I've heard that when I will provide a microaggression back to somebody and give them the reflection of like how that impacted me, it's a place of, oh my gosh, I did not mean that at all, or that wasn't what I was meaning to say. So it's also coming from unraveling a little bit of what is their meaning and what is their intent with their words. And in what ways has that been the same thing that they've done in other situations before? So I've talked about this with other people, and it's been a great opportunity to say, wow, I've probably said that compliment to multiple people from the same group. And, I'm so surprised. Because oftentimes what we'll also hear about people's experience with microaggressions is it's not an opportunity for them to really speak up. And so you may not hear that somebody has been negatively impacted by a microaggression that somebody else has delivered.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when it comes from like, again, that like power differential where someone in a position of power, whether that be in a family structure or at work, is saying that to you. It's put you in a difficult situation to call them out or call them in on it. And again, it's one of those things, it's like this little shove, right? And you're like, oh, did they bump me on purpose or was that an accident? And it can be this big mind trip, but yeah.
I'm curious too, you're talking about calling somebody out versus calling somebody in. Can we talk a little bit about that too and the different processes that come up with that?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't know when we started talking about this, like generally out in the social sphere, but this idea of like calling out, like when you call someone out, you like automatically like put that person on the defensive. You put them outside, like you are outside of the rules of what's okay. And now we're going to like tell you about yourself and admonish you for that, right? That is not really a place where learning happens. That is a place where defensiveness and shutting down and pulling back happens. And I'm not saying that we have to cater to everyone's feelings, but at the end of the day, our ultimate goal is like connection and understanding, right? And so this idea of calling people in, creating a safe space, like you are still in the circle of trust, the circle of love, right? And we want to understand, I want to understand what you meant because I'm trying to continue this relationship and this conversation, get on the same page, potentially have this learning teaching moment with you so that you can do better, so that we can do better. But instead of pushing you away to do that, which doesn't often work, I want to pull you in, right? How would you, I don't know, how do you think about it?
No, I'm so glad that we can sort of disentangle that, because what often happens with these types of questions around wanting to speak up, it often comes with this place of speaking up means that I need to make this dialogue difficult. And when we use the language of call them out, or bring this up, or even speak out, it also comes for us to say, wow, that would be really, really tough, because that is going to push me even further out of my comfort zone. So using that language of calling somebody in is just inviting them to a conversation. It's the same thing that we're doing here. It's creating that positive space. I want to understand where they're coming from. The majority of the conversations that we have about these things are from a place of just wanting to learn more from both sides. And so when we call them in, we allow for that. We don't have to bring them in from a place of defense, and we don't have to come from a place of offense. we can just kind of come and say, let's share at this table right now. And so I love the language of calling people in instead of calling them out, because I think it also allows for our allies and for those that are a part of the movement and finding ways to be able to make that first step to be more approachable.
Yeah, love it. Thank you for that clarification too, because we're trying to like spread information on the terms and also again these like tips and tricks, right? So what the next time you are in a situation where someone says something a little off around you, like think about calling them in versus calling them out. And you're going to have a totally different feel yourself and a potentially a different result because we're not pushing them away. We're not making them defensive. We're trying to connect more deeply. All right, we have a question in the queue, in the chat, so I'm going to read it. Thank you so much for submitting this question. This is a good one. So, I'm a white woman working in a D&I adjacent space. Lately, I've noticed I'm more inhibited in my conversation because I don't want to inadvertently say something offensive. How can I, on a Zoom call with multiple individuals, ask for input if they see areas where I can improve?
Okay, so asking for input where they see where you can improve. This is I think this is another aspect of another question that we're going to have too is, what are the places and what does it look like between speaking up, asking questions, being that listener, or, calling somebody in to the conversation like we just discussed. And it's going to look different with every opportunity. And oftentimes there's going to be places where you are going to be that expert, you are going to be that leader. And so this can be an opportunity for you to say, how am I going to include that in my sphere of influence? It may be on a Zoom call. It may be one of the things that's like super easier to do. It may be on the Zoom chat. It may be, an adjacent conversation. One of the things that I kind of love about that is you can reach out to people and say, I love, you mentioned this, but we're 5 minutes down the road on this Zoom meeting, but I want to get back to you about that. And so now there's a couple of different opportunities, especially within like the Zoom sphere or Zoom conferencing, to reach out and do that at a place that feels comfortable for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the person who asked this question, like that feeling of discomfort and not wanting to say something offensive is totally normal, right? We don't want to say anything wrong, especially not in this space, right? And we're not allowed to fail or make mistakes in any area or any arena. And so just sitting with that, I think is important. But I also think that it's okay to make mistakes, right? Because you are coming from a place of wanting to learn more and do better and do more. And that's going to happen. And so even prefacing when you feel that you want to share something that might be uncomfortable or might be offensive, like letting people know, hey, I'm not sure if I'm saying this the right way, and I would love to get your feedback on it. But this is what I'm thinking, right? This is what I've heard, or this is what I've read, or this is what I've experienced. Because again, we're getting rid of the stereotypes and assumption, and we're taking people at their experience. And then prefacing that, and then just going ahead and saying what you wanted to say, because if you do that, you're going to learn, right? You're going to find out if I was off, if I wasn't off, and then you're going to get that feedback. Whether people want to give it to you real time or afterwards, you can even let people know kind of what your preference is. But if you don't speak up and if you don't say it, then you'll never really know, and you won't be able to make those adjustments. Because in this space, one thing that is just super clear is that we're going to make mistakes and it's going to be uncomfortable, and we have to be okay with that discomfort. And one of the, I had someone give this really great sports or workout metaphor. Like when we are working out with a trainer, we know that they're going to kick our butt. We know that our muscles are going to burn. It's going to hurt. There will be discomfort. But what we have to do is look forward to that discomfort, because on the other side of that discomfort, on the other side of those 25 burpees is like strength. And what I want is that strength. And so I'm going to suffer through the discomfort, because on the other side of it, I've built that strength and that skill. And so if we think about this work, talking about race in that same way, we have to push through the discomfort, to expect it, to know it's going to be there. But on the other side is the growth and learning. And when we shy away from those uncomfortable conversations, uncomfortable areas, we're missing out on the opportunity to learn and to grow. And in some cases, like this is the thing though, like not everyone is going to react to you the way that you want them to, or even necessarily gracefully, right? And so knowing that each situation is different, each person, each group of people you're interacting with may have a different feel or vibe, but don't get discouraged and don't be too afraid to still put yourself out there, because again, this is for learning and it's for connection. And so some people might react like bad potentially, right? But that doesn't mean that the next time that's going to be the same. And as you endure and as you push through more of these circumstances, it'll get easier and easier. And so how do you continue to build that muscle? And when you feel that fear, lean into it, caveat the heck out of it, and then just go for it. And hopefully the people that you're working with, they know you, they know where you're coming from, and you can work together to get to that good place where you want to be. That was a long answer, but I I had a lot to say on that. Thank you so much for that question. It's very good. Very good question. Okay, Mo, are you ready for number 4? Okay, cool. So our next question, and this is it's a short and sweet one, but there's a lot of layers to it. So how can we use the privileges we have for good?
I love this question. This is like the root of allyship, and in looking at those places of privilege. And one of the things that is good about this is it's first examining where are your places of privilege. Where are those spaces and those spheres of influence where you feel like this is where your privilege might show up? Are you somebody that is privy to hiring practices and being able to hire within an organization? Are you someone that definitely feels at a place of comfort and control within a particular environment, where you feel like I can make a shift and I can be that disruptor to what I'm seeing as not being a part of, of the movement that I want to be in. And so it's first looking at a place of examining where those privileges, where you hold them, and understanding a little bit about, okay, this is a little bit where I feel so comfortable. And so I want to understand a little bit more about how I can experience some discomfort in that situation. And those are the places where I want to see that. So just to be giving some examples, because I think that there could be different places where that happens. Being in a place where I was on a call the other day, we're talking about creating some new policies similar to working around the D&I space for an organization. One of the things that I was aware of was that there was no part of this group that's typically and historically underrepresented on those calls. They were not on the calls at all, and they were not represented. And so I took this opportunity to say, I can come in here and I can ask a question about how that group is going to be supported by this policy, because I know I'm inherently supported by that policy. I'm inherently supported by the practice of even being here, showing up here, being invited to this space, and they historically have not been. So what are the ways that I'm going to show up, and what are the ways that I'm going to show up for the people that are either silenced or not visible, or not even being able to be on this, at this opportunity? So it's really, and also seeing, like, I know that this process or this policy is going to be okay for me. So how can I make it and uplift their needs in that situation? And that's where privilege comes in, right? I know I'll be taken care of if I talk about it, or if I push and ask a question for something more. That's where privilege is going to show up for you, and those are the places where you want to see yourself to make those moves. Carrie, what do you?
I love that. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that we all have privileges, right? A buzzword that we've been throwing around a lot in the last few months, and then before that as well, of course, is white privilege, right? And so a lot of people have a misconception of what white privilege is, which is what causes a lot of the defensiveness and the pushback around it, because people think that white privilege is basically, and I'm sorry to say the T word, but like Donald Trump, right? Where he had a silver spoon, he was given everything, and like that's white privilege. And a lot of, like, who had that life? Like, no one, hardly anyone had that life. And so white people are like, I didn't grow up with everything. I had a hard life. I struggled in XYZ way. So I do not have white privilege. But that's not actually true, because what white privilege is, it basically means that because of the color of your skin, you were given or you were afforded different privileges. And although your life might have been difficult in different ways, the color of your skin did not contribute to those difficulties, which cannot be said for people with brown skin, right? One of the things that brown people suffer from is excuse me, is directly related to the color of their skin, right? Different things happen because of the color of their skin. But white people, because that is like the norm, the like, ideal. And we're not even gonna like kind of unpack unpack that, the idea of whiteness. But that is like the norm, right? And so because that you're the normal and it's invisible to you, and that's why a lot of people like, I don't have privilege because I don't understand what that means. I don't see that, but it is invisible. A lot of our privileges are invisible. And Monique put it really well when she talked about like areas where you're super comfortable. You're like, oh, this is good. Like I have this access, I have these things. We're not often even aware of those, but those are areas where our privilege are. And so thinking about white privilege specifically just means that you have privileges, or whether you're not being put at a disadvantage because of the color of your skin, whereas people of color, that isn't the case. So I just wanted to kind of bring up that privilege, talk a little bit about white privilege, because I feel like that's kind of hidden in this question, even though they didn't call it out specifically. But then again, we all have privileges, and it's not, we don't need to feel guilty for the privileges that we have, but we do need to be aware of the privileges that we have and how we can use that for good, how we can use it to uplift other people around us, right? I'm privileged because I grew up in a middle-class family. Both of my parents, had jobs, like, I went to college, I have a master's degree, right? These are all different privileges. So we can all like list like 20 or 30. Living and being born in the United States of America is a privilege, right? But how can I use that? How can we use that to help other people? And in the case of race, how can we use that to uplift, to amplify, and to create opportunities? And the example Monique gave was really beautiful. Bring people into the room and bring their experience and their needs into the room when they actually can't be there because of their own access to certain rooms and certain tables and certain conversations, and the lack of privilege there.
I also like the idea of, this question comes up with the idea of privilege. How can I use it for good? And some of the background of the question is like that sometimes privilege is only used for bad. But, the idea around privilege and the space around privilege is that we all have some version of it. We all have some form of it just as we move within different areas. Sometimes even the people that come into these calls and have a little bit more education and information about these difficult questions will have a little bit more, insight into that in a different conversation that they may be involved with, tomorrow, next week, next month. And so coming to that is also a place of having a little bit more, and also being okay if you are the disruptor in that situation. So it's also coming to that and saying, I'm going to be okay, even if I decide to disrupt this. And or challenge any of the things that are happening. To me, that's the good that's going to come out of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely love it. Okay, cool. We have about 5 minutes left. Do you want to pick one of the last questions, whichever one you want? Dealer's choice.
I do, and it's because I think it's like the psychologist brain in me, but I'm going to go with the last one. And so I'll go ahead and pose it to you. Where is the line between compassion and enablement when it comes to addressing racism within one's social circle?
Yeah, so this question, all of these questions are really layered. And I hope that as you listen to our answers, like we're just scratching the surface. I feel like you could have a course on like each of these questions, right? And so we're just going to continue to do that. But the line between like compassion and enablement. So this idea that the people that we're talking to, we want to like take care of their feelings. We don't want to offend them. We don't want to damage the relationship, but then at the same time, we also don't want to enable the bad behavior. And so this is another example of that, like calling out versus calling in people. Because I feel like, and for me, this is just my own experience, my own thought about this. I think that it's our responsibility to be an interrupter, especially in our social circle, because the thing is like, racism and racist systems and racist ideas are like all around us all of the time. And if we're not willing to disrupt them, then nothing is going to change. And it doesn't have to be in like a violent or aggressive or mean or hurtful way. But just like, again, raising that question, oh, what did you mean by that? To start that dialogue. And I feel like we have the responsibility now. And in my mind, like this, it says the line between compassion and enablement. I'm like, because I'm a person of color, I'm like, you know what, we've been compassionate. Like it's time for us to like stop enabling like this like bad behavior, right? Again, going back to like that so gay example, like we just have to just it's uncomfortable, but that's okay. We just have to like go and like speak up, and if feelings get hurt, like that's not our intent, right? But hopefully you're able to repair those relationships, because the thing is, these conversations can get like heated, right? There are some people have families where, you know, it's like addressing racism within one social circle, like the things that people are saying is just like way, 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 way racist, right? And how do you have a conversation with a racist person? And I think that's kind of hidden in this question. And so I think that it's important to come from a place of wanting to listen and to understand, because if you go at them, you're just going to be like this and you're really not going to get anywhere. This is like your opportunity to understand what they mean, to ask more questions, to become a detective, and to kind of put your ego and the triggers and the fight like to the side and just become like this observer, this researcher. Because as you understand where they're coming from, what they're thinking, why they think this way, you can use that to try to like bring other tools, other resources, other ideas in to like undermine their thinking, right? Because at the end of the day, we do want people to be on our side. We want them to do the right thing. Like that's our ultimate agenda. It's not to understand you, it's so that you understand like the morality and the right way of thinking about this. And I'm just being completely honest right now. But in that, we can become that detective and try to uncover, you know, their argument, and then be able to turn that around by the things that we know, or that we've seen or we've experienced. And so I think that, you know, it's always easier said than done. But if you're just sitting there watching and listening to these things be said over and over again, like you're just enabling, and you're letting these ideas go on and on and on. And even if you stand up to the person and you have this like big blowout, you don't know what that impact is on them, and you don't know what the impact is on the people around you, because people are always watching you. And when you stand up for what is right, you are shining that light, and you're giving other people to shine that light too. So even if it seemed like you didn't get anywhere in whatever comes after that, standing up to those racist ideas, you don't know that your little niece or your nephew or your friend or your uncle is like, oh, wow, I'm glad that they finally said something, because that guy was getting on my nerves with what he was saying, right? You're giving other people permission to stand up as well, even if this is completely outside of your awareness. That was a little bit of a rant, my bad.
Add a little bit to that, the way that I consider and think about compassion is that compassion is constructive. I want to be able to understand that person, but I also want to be able to see in what ways can I help them. And so that's where, to me, compassion comes into these conversations and these dialogues. It's not to be a place of I am the expert and I need to teach you, but it's really to understand how can I help them, and how can I help our relationship, and understanding a little bit about what are these constructs, how are they coming up, what are the ways that the dialogue or the information that I'm now getting from them makes me uncomfortable, and how to get to a place of understanding that within our own social circle. I also hear about these things really regularly, that the questions that often come up are the places of a complete stranger, how do I disrupt? And on the other side of the spectrum, somebody I'm super close with, a family member or somebody that's in my social circle, how do I disrupt that too? The place that it comes from is really that place of understanding. And I think it's just bringing that home of calling them in. And sometimes it's going to sometimes feel easier to call in somebody that you don't know very well. And so these opportunities to call in somebody that you do know well, to have those that and come from that place of understanding and deepening that level of understanding around these difficult topics, so that you both can maybe learn something about where each of you are coming from. And that's how you're all going to really exhibit that compassion within that relationship.
Awesome. I love that. All right. Well, we are at 5:01. Monique, any last parting thoughts before we wrap up our session for tonight?
What I hope that we walk away from with this is that there's opportunities to have this these smaller moments at any level. And that really what we talk about with this Inclusion First project is we're coming from the place of action. We talk about these words like disruption and movement and a lot of just these sometimes things that feel bigger, systemic racism, but really you're let's come from the place of where you feel like you can make that first start. And so I hope that that's the place that we talked about today, in those avenues that feel like they're approachable, but at the same time pushing you a little bit more towards, allyship and the things that we're talking about today.
Awesome. Monique, thank you so much for lending us your insight and your brain tonight. This was a great conversation, and I want to thank everyone for coming today. You can learn more about the Inclusion First Project at www.inclusionfirstproject.org. And don't forget to submit your questions, because during the month of August, we are trying to collect 500 questions before the end of the month. And so sharing our post with your friends, sending in other questions that might have sparked for you since having this conversation. And of course, we have our next one is on Tuesday next week, same time, same place, same link if you want to save it actually. And we'll be answering totally different questions because we're getting more and more questions every week. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.